Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So in this video I'd like to introduce you to a new orchid of mine. I'll also need to do some splitting and repotting with this because, as you can see, it's really quite overgrown for the size of its pot. So this is an Oncidium type of orchid. The actual species is listed here, Oncostele Catatante. This isn't an orchid I've really known before, and I've looked this up online. There's not a huge amount of information on this particular species. With this type of orchid, what it tends to be is there's been lots and lots of different hybrids done over the years. So these aren't anything like a natural wild orchid would be. So there's not a defined set of species for it. It's put in this kind of hybrid species bracket for the horticultural listing. But it's generally lumped into the Oncidium kind of category. So these kind of orchids, what they do is they have what they call pseudobulbs, which are these big fleshy swollen stems here. These pseudobulbs slowly fatten up over the year, and what they do is they then store the energy and store the moisture, and so when it's ready for flower you can put on a really large flower and give a great display. These kind of orchids, they're not like Phalaenopsis orchid where they store the energy in the leaves and the roots. These store the energy in the pseudobulbs. Generally what happens is you'll start off with a young shoot, which will just be leaves. As those leaves grow and collect more energy from the sun, they'll start fattening up a pseudobulb. So as you can see, this one here starting to do at the bottom there. And then when they get older, they do actually lose the leaves after they finish flowering. The pseudobulbs will last a few more years and then eventually die off. But they'll put out lots of new side shoots and the whole plant will generally keep growing. And that's what's happened here. It looks like there was probably about 3 original pseudobulbs, or 3 original plants, so to say. These have formed pseudobulbs, and then they've kept growing new ones as time's gone on. They haven't grown on this side though, only on the other side, so you can see there's lots of new growth on here, and it's getting very congested now. So what I need to do is split them up, give them more space. What I'm going to do is split them up and put them into 2 pots, so half the plant's going into the original pot, and the other half is going into a new pot, and that should give it a lot more space so it can continue to grow, and it really needs that space to grow into a big enough plant to flower. So this plant, I was very fortunate to be given it to me by one of my relatives as a housewarming gift. This plant, I think it's probably been living in quite a low light environment. When I got it, there wasn't that many leaves and they're very yellow. These leaves are quite recent. The leaves were more like these kind of paler ones down here. What I've done since I've had it about a month or 2 now. Gave it a feed. That seems to have greened up its foliage and it's put on a bit more growth since I fed it. But there's still no signs of flowering, and I think it's too congested to have any flowers soon. So I'll just get started now and I'll start separating the plant. You can see that there, the roots are still healthy, so it is quite a healthy plant, but they are very, very congested. You can see there's not much space for them left to grow. So what I need to do is try and loosen this up, separate the plant into 2 different separate sections so I can get 2 pots out of it. So I'm just going to carefully tease this apart. So there seems to be a natural separation point around about here on the plant, so I'm just going to try and pull them apart at this section. I don't want to cut them because I don't want to cut any of these stems apart, but this is going to damage quite a few roots. I'm trying to snap as few as I can, but inevitably I will snap a lot of these roots. I'm just going to try and tease them apart. So that seems to be the 2 general largest sections of the plant. What I'm going to do now is just tease off any of the older growing substrate. Just give it some nice fresh growing substrate, and if there's any dead or dying roots, I'll take them off as well. But generally these roots are quite healthy, so I think I will probably keep most of these. So the compost I'm going to be using is orchid compost. This particular one I've got recently from the shop. It has a real mixture of different things in it. It's mainly bark, but it's also got some ceremis, which is expanded clay particles. These expanded clay particles, basically there's lots of air gaps in there, and what happens is it provides a place for water to be absorbed, but it's also quite porous, so there's plenty of oxygen in there as well. So I'm just going to start filling out the bottom of these plant pots now. And as I put them in the pot, what I'm going to do is, because it's always growing on this one side, I want to put these old pseudobulbs right at the back and then free up some more space at the front here, which is the direction the bulbs will continue to grow in. Because if I planted it at this side, they would keep growing on this one side, but nothing much would grow back on this back section. So I really want to make sure it's positioned so there's plenty of space for it to continue growing in that direction that it has been growing in previously. One of the trickiest things about this repotting will actually be trying to get all the new substrate around its roots. because it's quite a tangle of roots, it's going to be a little bit tricky getting them in, so I'm just doing it mainly by shaking, and it's quite fine, some of the substrate, so it should fall in quite nicely. But I just want to make sure it's got a decent covering around the roots and there's not any big air gaps or any spaces in between. If there's too many air gaps, it will just dry out and plants won't do quite as well. But as this is an epiphytic plant which grows naturally on the sides of trees, if there are some air gaps in the soil, it's not as big a problem as it would be for most houseplants. So that's the two plants now fully potted up. Now this is the first time I've really grown Oncostele orchids. Normally most of the orchids I've grown in the past are either Phalaenopsis orchids or Dendrobium orchids. These will be more similar to the Dendrobium type of orchids because they also have pseudostems, although the pseudostems on them are very different because they flower right along the top of the pseudostem, and the pseudostems on them are much more obvious and much taller, and it's a much bigger part of the plant. Also the leaves on these are a lot bigger. These can handle brighter light conditions than Phalaenopsis orchids. They also like to be kept quite damp, so I need to make sure they don't dry out. I will give them a slightly cooler, drier period in winter, where I'll let them go semi-dormant. The reason being I have very low light levels here in Scotland, and so I'm not going to be keeping these under grow lamps, and these will actually do better with a rest period than a Phalaenopsis orchid, which tend to be a little bit more tropical. They need higher temperatures year round, where these can handle slightly cooler temperatures. They're not as they can't handle the very cool temperatures that some other types of orchids can handle. So although they're not as tropical as Phalaenopsis orchids, I still need to keep them quite warm. So I'm not letting these go below 10 degrees this winter. But this conservatory probably will be allowed to go down to about 10 degrees. And I'll be keeping them in quite a bright position. Over this winter that's coming up now, I'm going to be keeping them in full sunlight in a bright location because the sunlight here is so weak. Full sun on these isn't going to be an issue. Come spring and summertime though, I will be keeping these away from the harsh sunlight because they don't want the full sunlight. These are epiphytic orchids, so they grow on the trunks of trees, and they tend to be just underneath the canopy, so they get diffuse sunlight in the tropics. So I need to replicate something similar to that for these. So as I say, it's the first time I've grown these orchids. I'm not sure how I'll do. They've been growing well for me so far. They do tend to be quite easy orchids to look after, so they should do well. They will be in quite a bit of shock for a little while though, because I've disturbed the roots an awful lot. And to be honest, I probably could have got a slightly larger pot because this one's got a good amount of space, but this one's still quite tight. This is the original pot they came in, and it looks like I've not taken anything out of it, to be honest. So I really could do with a bigger pot, and I'll probably be repotting them again in about a year's time, looking at how tight they are in the pot. But with most orchids, being pot bound is not a big issue. It will stunt the growth slightly, but they do tolerate being pot bound quite well, and quite often it actually does help them to flower a bit better. So that's all for this video. As I say, I'm not an expert when it comes to these type of orchids. I've grown Phalaenopsis and Dendrobiums very well in the past, so it's going to be quite a fun new plant for me to grow. This particular variety has got really big flower shoots, so the flower shoots should grow to 2 or 3 foot in height. Also the leaves in this variety are particularly large. It's not a small orchid, it is a big orchid. I need to give it plenty of space, and I need to give them much bigger pots in the future, as these will become very large plants. But that's all for this video, and I'll give you guys an update in spring when they should be coming back into growth. As it is now autumn, they're going to go probably semi-dormant, might lose 1 or 2 leaves, and they're not going to be putting on much growth. But hopefully come spring, I'll give you guys another update.